Hello everyone. Welcome to the very first long-form episode of 2024 in our show of Paragliding Atlas. The last one which you heard was an Ask Me Anything episode, which was more or less like a bonus content supposed to tell you what the roadmap is and what the coming year has in store for us. This time around, we are back to our usual length format episode. And just to clarify, as I mentioned in the previous AMA episode, from now on, we're going to broaden the horizon and perspectives into helping you navigate the overall sport in a much more safer and a enriching and a fulfilling manner. Now, what that means is that we're not just going to talk about geographical locations, we're going to talk about certain topics, certain areas of interests, which are usually a part of the banter, as I said, things that you're curious about as a paraglider pilot. So for the month of January, we're going to talk about racing paragliders. And racing paragliders, again, is a very broad topic. There are multiple subtopics that can be discussed. But this time around, we're going to focus on pre-World Cups. Now, how it caught my eye is that I was just browsing Civil Comp's website and I saw there are two really interesting pre-World Cup locations that are being put out for the pilots to join. The first one in my home country of India, and it's very surprising that I haven't really flown in this location yet. But today, to help us navigate this location, we have a wizard from there who has flown and who has lived and who has basically done everything that is needed to touch the sky with glory in this amazing location. And secondly, which is coming out next weekend, is Kenya. I thought Kenya was just about going out to see safaris and having a vacation or, just one of those gala times when you switch off during winter. But there's another person who has been going there, who's been taking tours, who knows the place in and out. So that's why it got me thinking, if these guys are able to push the limit and actually hold organized competitions in such exotic locations, then definitely we need to bring out their story and tell it to the world. Anyways, without further ado, I'm going to dive right into this episode. Basically, this episode is in a location called Panchgani. Now, Panchgani, as the name suggests in local language, means land of 5 hills, which is nestled in a volcanic plateau. I mean, it gets super interesting, If you Google this up, this dates way back to prehistoric geographical marvels that happened on its own. And it's a volcanic plateau which forms a part of a larger tableland called Deccan Plateau in the whole of South Indian region. So keeping in tune with that, we have a local legend who has been flying there for more than 10 years. I mean, he grew up in this area and he has been exploring this area with his paraglider for more than 10 years. Knows it like the back of his hand, and more often than not, he has often touched the sky with glory while pushing the limits in Panchgani. And one of the highlights of his flying career is that he has willingly gone into a cloud and come out super happy with the brightest smile that you'll ever see a person exiting a cloud for. Usually it is the other way around, that people are shit scared and they don't know, but this guy has managed to have that experience, which by any means, I do not advocate going into a cloud willingly for all the reasons that you know already. It's not the safest thing to do. However, at the end of the show, you'll get to hear a little bit of an excerpt from him about how it went and all that you need to know to be a part of this pre-World Cup and to race paragliders in Panchgani. So let's get this going. All right, Wiz, thank you so much for joining us all the way from India. We have come today for this episode to talk about Indian Nationals pre-World Cup, which is supposed to happen in the month of February, a month from now, in the land of Panchgani, I've heard. Is there more to flying paragliders in India than just in Beer and in the Himalayas?
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for having me. So yes, of course. So we've got the Sayadri range, and Panchgani is one of the hill stations, and it's a really fascinating flying site. It's far more technical than Beer. So I really enjoyed it. So you can't do really big distances because we are just about 100K from the coast, but I would say a 30-kilometer flight in Panchgani is, as good as a 100K flight in Beer Billing. So that's how technical the place is.
All right. So basically, it won't give you your personal best, but it will definitely bring out your personal best when you're trying to navigate the landscapes here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. But, just for the context of the audience of Paragliding Atlas, so far India is a massive country, everybody knows. And now I just realized you mentioned Sayadris. So what all possibilities does this amazing country offer down there? Like most of our audiences in our show know Himalayas because they're the grandest and the longest and the mightiest. But Sayadris look a bit humble, but again, very close to the coast. It seems like a really amazing thing. So if you can give our audiences an idea, What all is there in India to fly paragliders at?
So if you look at the geography of India, if you look at the Indian map, it's roughly like an inverted triangle, right? So if you see the top side of the triangle, if you keep that, if you invert the base, so on the top, along the north, running from east to west, you have the Himalayas. Okay. And then along the west coast, all along that line of the triangle, you have the Sahyadri range, which starts somewhere in Gujarat and stretches down all the way, to the south, if I'm not mistaken, all the way to Kerala. So the entire range runs parallel to the west coast of India, approximately about 100 kilometers inland, and it kind of creates a plateau. So you have the coast, and then you have the Sahyadris, and then you have the entire Deccan Plateau after that. So it's quite interesting. I mean, every evening you have the coastal winds coming in, so your window has to be timed accordingly. But in the time that you get to do XC, it's quite glorious.
So good to hear that. So basically, if I try to understand, this range extends almost the length of Himalayas or close to it, and then it involves a little bit of flatland perspective because if it evens out in a plateau, then basically you have to bring your coastal soaring plus flatland game into the play to navigate these areas.
Exactly, exactly. I think it'll be very interesting to have an ex Sayadris sometime in the future. It's been a dream, and hopefully I will start working on that pretty soon. So I think it'll be one of the very interesting and technical races on the lines of X Alps and X Pyrenees.
Now, sounds exciting. And I mean, as you said, India is a massive country full of amazing features. And I'm just looking at the photos on Civilcom's website, and honestly, they look very enticing. I mean, this looks a little bit like Turkey or something. Is that correct?
It's got its own topography. So Panchgani geographically sits somewhere almost in the middle of India. If you see the north-south span of India, so very close to Pune city. So it's just about a 2-hour drive from Pune, and from Bombay, it's about, I would say, 4.5 to 5 hour drive south of Mumbai. So the main topography in the area is there are volcanic plateaus. So you have these tablelands, with very sharp vertical cliff, volcanic rock, which kind of heat up in the first part of the day, and then they have their own little thing happening over there. So it's a tricky site. Like I mentioned, you have your predominant wind direction, and then in each valley, in each bowl of the Sahyadris, you have its own little wind directions and thermal activity that happens.
Sounds so good. I mean, when you talk about volcanic rocks and all of that, I think the curiosity that every one of our listeners must be having can pretty much be set aside for a whole different episode. So let's just talk a little bit about this. Can you give our listeners a little bit of an introduction about this pre-World Cup that is happening in this volcanic plateau, as you say it?
So Panchgani has been a little the secret of paragliding for quite a long time. I did my schooling in Panchgani in a boarding. And I remember in those days, I don't know what, maybe 35, 40 years ago, there used to be this one hang glider pilot. Okay. I don't know his name. He was a foreigner. And, I mean, that's when I actually heard about, man being able to fly. And, my interest in flying was kind of kindled from that, first sight of somebody flying, free flying in the air. After that, there have been a lot of pilots in that area. Most notably, we had somebody called Andre Savard, who was a French Canadian, married to an Indian, and he had settled down in Panchgani. He ran a little establishment called EcoCamp, which was like, cheap tented accommodation, which was, like home for pilots for many years. Sadly, Andres, decided to move to Canada again, and we don't really have a home in Panchgani now. So I started flying there about, I think, 10 years ago. And the idea of, I mean, I was with PI at the time. And I think that's when we did our first little competition in Panchgani, which was also a PI event. I think this was about 7 or 8 years back. And I think in the first event, we just had about 30 pilots. It was a very informal thing. I left PI after that and continued, I continued to want to do comps in Panchgani. So we started doing, I set up something called IPC, which is Indian Paragliding Competitions. And almost every year since we've been doing a competition. So the next year we had about 60, 70 pilots. And, the following year, and then in 2019, we actually did the first Free World Cup. This was not through PR, and we had almost 100 pilots flying in Panchgani. So now this is the second Free World Cup, but the first one that's actually been conducted by the Paragliding Association of India. So that's kind of the competition history in Panchgani. It's developed over quite a few years. And we had a very good report from the PWC observer in the last competition. So I'm positive that, next year we'll probably be able to bid for the World Cup as well.
Super exciting. So the secret spot is definitely not going to be a secret anymore, I believe.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I can see you have 66 pilots registered already, and we are still almost a month and a half away. So it sounds like a party is coming to Panchgani finally. And I think we need to give a little bit of credit to these pioneer hang glider pilots who have literally gone out, back in the 70s and the 80s, as you said, going out exploring these gems for us and finding it out and putting it out there for the paragliding community. Like they deserve a little bit more attention than we do than we get them now.
Yeah, unfortunately I don't have names, but now that you mention it, I'm going to actually find out, who were the stalwarts who actually started flying in Panchgani. But I do want to mention a prominent Indian pilot by the name of Dilip Kotecha. He's no more, but he, really set the place on fire, with all his flying. If you see his tracks on Leonardo, he's done some, really insane flights, flying from Pune all the way to Panchgani, going up to 4,000 meters. So it's really amazing because the altitude you achieve in Panchgani, between, in season, in the peak time, between 3,000 to 4,000 meters. And, your takeoff altitude is about 11 or 1,200. So it's really amazing, how far you get, far up you get. In some ways, on those good days, it kind of even beats beer willing, because beer willing, you do get up to 4,000-5,000, but, the land is also higher. So your altitude above the land is not quite the same. So that's what's so special about it.
This reminds me of these amazing flights that some pilots have been doing in South Africa, or like maybe we're like, what's the AGL that we are talking about? I mean, ASL, I understand. So you're telling me that AGL is beyond, like, it blows your mind, or what kind of AGL?
So AGL, sometimes you get about 3,000. You can go up to 3,000 AGL. That's quite a bit.
No way.
Yeah.
No way. I think I remember seeing a video of yours where you were coming out of a cloud, frosted up top to bottom, and that was like, man, he is living the life. So cool. All right, quickly before we move on to the actual flying, because this is getting super excited now. Just if a pilot wants to come down, for this World Cup, and he plans to land in Mumbai or Bombay, as you said, the airport, what are the easiest transportation options for them to kind of get to this place and make it happen? And how long does it take?
So today the easiest thing to do is get an Uber, which I think is also cost effective. There's something called Uber Outstation. And not sure of the exact cost. I think Uber to Kamshet would be about 2,500. So I'm thinking, to Panchgani, will be in the vicinity of, say, 5,000 rupees, which is pretty decent. Apart from taking a taxi, you can also get buses going to Panchgani from Mumbai and from Pune. So taxi and bus are the main. Unfortunately, trains don't go to all the way to Panchgani. However, you can take a train from Bombay to Pune, which is about 4 hours, and then a taxi ride or a bus ride, which is again about 2.5 hours from Pune.
I mean, when you talk about less than $100 for a chauffeur-driven car, I don't think anyone's gonna miss a train ride or a bus ride. That's the beauty of flying in the Indian subcontinent. You bring in all your money and you feel like a king. You literally get treated like a Maharaja in true sense.
And I'm also amazed that, there are a lot of foreign pilots who come and, spend a lot of time in Panchgani. Because, if you see weather-wise, you have the beach season, which is, let's say from October to November, or maybe mid-November. After that, it's a great time to go to Goa and, party and do, Christmas and New Year and all that. And then if you come straight to Panchgani, it's the perfect time. So, January to March is the perfect time for Panchgani. And then again, March onward is the season back in beer billing. So it kind of, is the perfect bridge if you want to spend an entire, season of flying in India. So great. I mean, I know a lot of foreign pilots who do that. They come here and live for 6 months at a time and, just do this journey, which I just told you. And the amazing part, sorry, why I mentioned it is because even for them, the retrieves are so easy. Wherever you land, you stick your thumb out, somebody will give you a ride, people want to take you home, they want to feed you, there's somebody offering to drop you off on a bike. So it's quite amazing, you can just get around with, even on a shoestring budget.
Well, I mean, it sounds like the perfect getaway, like as you said, if you get there in the season of September, enjoy everything that you want to touch the sky with glory and beer for a while, and then unwind next to the beautiful and serene beaches of Goa, which are a little bit crowded sometimes, but of course, you always have other options. There are multiple things, and then get stuck in Panchgani for a while, and then back to beer, like perfect way to spend the winter.
Exactly.
Like right now, I'm in Europe, and this is like nothing but cold and depressive. And the FOMO after you've told me this is hitting me really hard. But anyways, moving on to the actual flying part, I was just looking at your website, and it said that this competition even has a cross country class for E and B category gliders. I remember in the beginning of this conversation, you said it's a lot more technical, but having an E and B class means it is accessible even to the new beginners or the fairly newer pilots in the sport. So if you can just talk about flying, like what all intricacies does the terrain throw at you, and how can like a novice pilot navigate it compared to an expert one who anyways know their craft?
Right. So when we talk about E and B gliders, I mean, we have a category for it. Of course, you still need to be, a fairly good pilot. You should be able to, take off in strong winds, strong thermic conditions. Ideally, you should have done an SIV because thermals can be pretty punchy at times. And there's a component of wind as well. So, and the very interesting part about Panchgani is that, you have inversions at various layers, and you can get, at various levels, you may have the wind coming at different directions. So you may climb up to a certain altitude, and then, you have a strong shear, and a bit of rock and roll. And then again, you're climbing in a different direction. And then that happens once again. So, roughly at every 1,000 meters. So that's quite common. You should have some knowledge about strong wind flying. I would not advise this for somebody, who's only used to flying in alpine conditions, with very little knowledge of wind, because the wind here can be a killer. If you're not aware, you're not constantly aware of where the wind is. And if you do manage to get into the lee side, it's not forgiving. So yeah. So even though we have an ENB category, what that means is that the tasks are going to be designed in such a way that maybe the first 50% of the tasks will be relatively easy and will be designed with a lot of high safety in mind for ENB gliders. And then progressively, the rest of the tasks will be more difficult, so that, people who are taking part, they can at least finish, half the tasks and kind of learn the ropes of how to fly a competition.
This is getting very interesting, Wes, when you said that there are multiple wind shear factors and everything.
Yes.
So, like since we talked about the volcanic plateau, can you give our listeners a little bit of an idea of what kind of terrain, like how does it look like, and basically what do you expect when you go on the launch? The reason I'm asking this question is because I recently had an episode on Australia come out, one of the legends of our sport, Godfrey, and he was very vocal in telling that there are some dust devils on the takeoff and, different kind of challenges. So what does Panchgani throw at you when you go out there for the first time and open up your canopy?
So
Visually, if you can explain it visually, like how does it look like?
Okay, so I'll start with the takeoff. We have a number of takeoffs in Panchgani because the wind kind of changes direction, through the season. So, it starts with a kind of, north-northeast aspect. And then, towards as the season progresses towards spring, so I'm talking about from November to, let's say, March. Okay. So we have the wind kind of changing directions. And, towards the end of the season, we've got more south, like a southeast aspect coming from there. So one has to be mindful of that. One needs to have some knowledge of that to select the correct takeoff. Because what tends to happen is that you can kind of get fooled, if you're in a particular bowl, and if you wait long enough, for the bowl to start heating up, you can feel that the wind is coming head on. But actually, once you go up to a certain altitude, you realize that the predominant wind is from a different direction. So forecasts are, very, very important. Most of the forecasts work quite accurately in terms of wind direction. However, wind strength is something you can only see once you get to the takeoff. That kind of varies. And so one of my favorite flight routes in Panchgani, just like you have in Beer Billing, you have the, Dharamshala and back, kind of a route. So a couple of years back, we were all trying to explore, beyond Panchgani, and quite a few of us have now flown from Panchgani to Kamshet, which is approximately 100 kilometers northwest, you know. And if I was to describe the terrain in that area, so let's say you're flying north and you have like a series of ridges. If you look in the map, they all look a bit like dragons, so very, with arms and limbs sticking out. And on the left, you have the drop off, which is the Western Ghats. So there's this entire drop off from the plateau. And then you can see in the distance, all the way till the coast on a clear day. So in between all the ridges, they're all dams. So you have lakes. So I like to call it the 7 lake tour because in these 100 kilometers, there are 7 prominent lakes that you see one after the other. So, I mean, I don't know if that gives you a kind of idea of the terrain. So you've got these, lines of ridges. In between, you've got flat land where you've got lakes, you've got dams. So it's really interesting, really scenic. As long as you're high, there's not a care in the world. If you get low and close to the terrain, you have to be very, very aware of which direction the wind is coming from. Because normally during season in the morning, you've got east winds. And, by late afternoon, it kind of switches and the sea wind starts pushing in. So, there's after a certain period, you can even have west winds kicking in, which are not very good for thermaling, but sometimes they kick up, huge periods of restitution where, you can just, be floating around at, 2,500, 3,000 meters, not having to thermal, it's just amazing.
Free lift up till 2-3,000
Yes.
meters sounds
Yeah.
amazing.
And geographically, Panchgani itself is actually a cluster of, I mean, Panchgani means 5 villages. And also in that area, there are 5 distinct tablelands. So each tableland is like, it's like a volcanic, plateau, completely flat at the top. And we use it a lot for top landings. However, during the time of a switch, you see dust devils. So that is something you have to be very careful of. So yes, you do get dust devils, but they are always visible and you can choose to avoid them and fly around it for sure because they happen in the most thermic part of the day. So, you can choose to fly on instead of, landing in a dust devil.
Makes all the more sense. Landing in a dust devil is not the plan for any pilot, I guess. But while we are talking about challenges, what is the most common mess up that you see a foreign or a visiting pilot make? Like, of course, the ones who fly there often enough know the red flags. But what is something that can catch you off guard as someone who has just come there for the first or the second time and doesn't really know what the nature might throw at you?
So we've had one incident so far, in the last pre-World Cup, which I mentioned to you in 2019. On the very first day of the competition, we had a trial day, And we had one of the top ranking Korean pilots who, had a crash and, unfortunately, passed away. I think the main reason was the wind. He was too close to the terrain. He was low and he did not account for the wind factor. So, he got into the lee and, crashed his glider. Unfortunately, didn't have enough time to deploy the reserve. So I think that's a pretty extreme situation. I think it's the only TT that's happened in the region in the 10 years that I've been flying there. So I think some no-nos are, unless you really know the area well and you've understood exactly what's happening with the aerology in the region, don't get close to the terrain. So if you get below, I mean, we like to put it this way that if you get below 1800 meters, start looking for a safe landing. Don't start, trying to scratch around, don't get close to the terrain unless you really know what you're doing. So if you're 100% sure that yes, the wind is coming back on and you're not in the lee side, then go for it. Then scratch, do whatever you want. But if you don't know where you are, you don't know what the wind is doing at that point of time, I mean, it's quite possible, I mean, if you're high up, you can see in one valley, the wind is coming from the east. In the other valley, you'll see some smoke blowing from the west. And it can be very confusing, because it's all thermic air. See, what happens is as the day progresses, we all know that, rocks take some time to heat up. But once they've heated up, they start throwing up strong thermals. So what tends to happen is that if you can imagine like a volcanic plateau, something like, I don't know, what are the famous ones? I think there's one in Australia. I don't know what it's called. I think the one in America is called Devil's Rock or something like that, where it has this mesa with a flat top. So what happens in a situation like this is all the sides which are volcanic have kind of absorbed heat. Let's say all morning it's been absorbing heat from the east. And, in the afternoon, let's say around 2:30, the predominant wind switches to the west. What's going to happen is that you're getting wind from the west. The rocks which have heated up all morning in the east are still throwing up thermals and they're sucking up all the wind from the valley below. So it's quite possible that you'll see in that valley, you're going to see wind, the smoke blowing from the east and getting pulled towards these rocks. On the west side, it's the predominant sea breeze that's, pushing wind from the west. And, if you are in a confusing situation like this, you should look for a safe landing. So if you don't know where you are, if you don't know where the wind is from, if you go below 1800, the terrain, the mountain tops are at around 1200. So start looking for safe landings is what I feel.
That's quite exciting the way you explain it. So basically, anything below 5-600 AGL, that means that is the cutoff line for you. You should not really try to push
Yes.
it with that big.
Yeah, if you're a newbie in the area, definitely, and play it safe when you get there till you understand, exactly what's happening with the wind and the thermals.
Now, so either it's like get high and stay high. If
Yeah.
not, just don't put your all the eggs into one basket and then try and look for a landing. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I was just looking at the competition page on Civil Comps, and there was a lot of equipment recommendations. Now, I do understand a lot of these come with the legislation that PWC committee has put on. But usually, what kind of equipment is recommended to fly here? Because I believe the land is really barren and stony at times, considering it's a volcanic plateau. And one thing that I've known that a lot of gliders come out in a different color when they go out there, probably because of the volcanic sand. So
Yeah.
I think hike and fly equipment is definitely not recommended. So if you can just throw some light on what kind of equipment do you recommend visiting pilots to bring in?
Yeah. So one of the main takeoffs now we've got this green sort of fabric put on the takeoff. And I think that's pretty kind to the winds. One of the earlier takeoffs that we had, which is very famous, Harrison's Folly, that is almost completely covered with red dust. So if you take off from there or you land there, it's guaranteed that your glider, if you come with a nice white colored alpine wing, it's going to go back red. And, definitely it's going to affect your resale. So yeah, don't come to Panchgani with your best wing. All of us local pilots, we have two wings. So we'll have our competition wings and the bead willing wing, and then we have a local wing which is already red in color. But it doesn't really affect the material. Any rocks that are in the area are mostly pebbles, so nicely rounded. There are no sharp rocks as such to kind of cut your glider or snag the lines and things like that. There is quite a bit of grass even till now. So if you look at the start of the season in November, there are actually photographs of green grass on the takeoffs. It's really gorgeous in November. You don't get very high, but the sheer visual beauty of the place is fabulous. After the rainfall, if flying is not your only focus, then we've got the Kars Plateau close by, which is a World Heritage Site. It's covered, it's green and lush with all kinds of flowers and things like that. But as it progresses into the season, the grass kind of starts drying up, slowly turns to yellow, and then eventually kind of, completely, around March, the locals start burning the grass. For what reason, I cannot fathom. But I think they do it to control accidental fires. So they start burning regions. So late in March, you actually see, entire hillsides which are black in color, and that's not very nice. So yes, if you just lay your wing down anywhere and, then, it's not nice. But there are enough places if you plan your landings. We have this beautiful lake called Home Dam. It's a lake, it's a dam on the Krishna River, and which forms a V-shaped lake. And that's kind of our favorite spot. You come, you land by the lake, you have laminar winds. Even if you land on the tableland, the main tableland of Panchgani, which we normally do, because then it's just a short hike down to wherever you're staying. That's also quite forgiving. Even late in the season, there are patches of grass, not green grass, but yellowed out grass, where you can lay out your wing and pack it without it turning a different color.
Without
So
Panchgani putting a stamp on it saying that, yes, you've
yes,
been here.
yes, yes. But if you take off a land on Harrison's Folly, there's it's guaranteed that your wing is going to turn red.
Now, I think that's an achievement in itself that you basically kind of have earned it. Not a lot of glider pilots can say that we have been to a place which gave our glider a whole different hue in a sense.
Yeah, that's a good
Now,
way to look at
quickly,
it. Yeah, but we've got a lot of people coming back. I mean, so I don't think anyone's really worried about their wing changing color so much.
no, I think the reward of flight is better anyways, more important than the color of the wing, because after a while you don't really focus on resales, and
Exactly.
ENC and beyond resale doesn't really promise big rewards anyways. Quickly while we are talking about wings, it just struck my mind. You talked a lot about wind shear and the wind playing its own role. What kind of average glides do you have in a place like this? And, what is the ideal wing class that you can fly there and not get frustrated? Because I imagine A and B have their own limitations, just like anywhere else in the world. So, what kind of glides and what kind of transitions do we look at? If we can quickly touch upon that before we move on to the next topic of landing and retrieves eventually.
So I think so. The first time I flew from Panchgani to Kamshed along the Sayadri, I completed the distance of. I mean, I did spend some time, for the day to actually start. But once I got the first, good thermal of the day, I think that 100-kilometer transition happened in about 2.5 hours. Aided by, I would say, maybe a 7, 8, or 10 kilometer, wind, slightly cross, slightly tailwind. Transitions, I think the whole distance was covered in approximately, I think, 10 or 11 climbs. So that means, roughly about 10 kilometer transitions. So I would say 7 to 10 kilometers. I did that flight on a high ENB. It was advanced IOTA. So I think if you have a high B glider today, even the low B gliders are pretty good, or a C glider, it's great. And ENA wing will be a bit frustrating, but I think for a beginner pilot, it'll still be quite rewarding. I mean, depending on what kind of distances you're focusing on.
Well, I must bring to our audiences here that you fly in a glider extremely well, and a high B has been your forte for quite a while in beat as well, and you smashed some big distances there. So not everybody can mirror your flights on a high B, but yeah, thank you for bringing out that. But 2.5 hours for 100 kilometers, that sounds really fast.
Yes.
That is a
Yeah. So if you see the track, I mean, the track log is around 4 hours. But if you actually see from the point that I left Panchgani, I took my first thermal and then went towards Kamshet. It's just about 2.5 hours, which actually I haven't beaten that time even on an ENC wing. So so yeah, it all depends on the day. Maybe it was just a good day with thermals coming along very easily. Thermals exactly where I expected them to be, not having to hunt around because it is a little different. Every day that the wind changes a little bit, a few degrees. The place where you could possibly predict the next thermal to be kind of changes. So if you there are some days where you have to hunt for it. There are some days where you have cloud streets. So if you're high, it gets really easy. Just fly from cloud to cloud. Some days the visibility is not so good. Those are the tough days, but you still get pretty good flight.
I wanted to touch upon this topic before moving on. What kind of visual clues are obvious for pilots when they get out in the air? I mean, of course, I think in a place like this, as soon as you go out and take off, it probably is like you soar until you reach the thermal, or is there a thermal directly? And once you're in the flight, then if you can just talk about the visual clues that you guys refer to and how it differs from the ground, and when do you transition to the ones in the air?
So most of the takeoff, currently the favorite takeoff is near this place called Sydney Point. It's also known as the Dilip Kotecha takeoff, the pilot I spoke to you about earlier. It's an east takeoff. Some tandem guys are using it, or they've been using it for the last 2 years, and they've really, maintained it well. It's completely covered by green cloth. And yeah, if your wind is from the east, it does allow you to do a bit of soaring, till you find the house thermal. So in that manner, it's quite forgiving. So you can take off and soar around, till you find the thermal and then get up. So yeah.
All right. And basically, once you're a little bit up, when the wind shear comes into the play, let's say 1,000 meters above it, does the visual clues change? Because eventually, like cloud streets and on like less visibility days. So, how does life look like once you are high enough above the ground? And then how do you choose your transition points and the way forward?
So I mean, if you're used to hill flying, if you're used to flying in relatively windy and thermic conditions, I think it's pretty straightforward. So once you've taken your time, I like to take my time once I take off. I like to take my time to kind of figure out what's happening on that particular day. So I will waste some time, climbing as high as I can before I actually start transitioning. To understand at which levels, the shears are. So, normally you'll expect the first one to be, between 1800 to 2100 meters. Your next one will probably be at, 26 or 2700 meters. So once you've kind of figured this out, also looking at, weather forecast charts, etc., for the various levels, that's important that you look at various height levels when you're preparing for the day. So the triggers are normally, if you look at the windward side of, any of the tablelands or the hills, you get triggers of the edges. Most of the tablelands have like a prominent kind of mound, maybe in the center or somewhere. That will definitely have a trigger. If you go out in the flats, then you have all your normal flatland triggers as well. So that's the interesting part. You can also do flatland flying in between the mountain ranges.
Sounds like a dream. So basically, you're saying while navigating the dragon's back, as you said, like it's a spine which spreads out in a dragon's kind of illustration, and
Correct.
then that is combined with flatland flying at times,
Correct.
mixed with the wind coming from the sea breeze and at different shear levels.
Yeah. So your ridges are generally, about 10 kilometers apart. So it's nice to get that little, one thermal in the middle of the two ridges. So, and then normally rivers that are flowing in the centers of these valleys. I mean, they're not really valleys. The valleys are also pretty flat. So you've got an area of flat, and you've got like a vertical shear, and then you've got a flat tabletop. So very,
Oh,
very,
sounds super exciting.
yeah, very, very interesting. And, lots of options to top land. Most of the rivers running, in the middle, obviously trigger off, thermals that are flowing from the flats. So, yeah.
Amazing. I think just by listening to this, I'm finding it hard to believe if there's any other place which offers so much excitement, because usually places are like either alpine only or flatlands only, or
Correct.
like they have their very own distinctive features. But this place seems to offer everything in one place. And also, I mean,
Absolutely.
that kind of makes sense why it leaves a mark on your glider, because it is unique on itself.
I think it leaves a mark on you. I mean, once you've flown in Panchgani, I mean, I haven't known anyone who's flown here and not, gone away, falling completely in love with the place. So, because even the town itself is quite special, I mean, it's a very popular destination, a hill station. So, you get to taste all kinds of foods from all over India. It's very famous for its strawberries, mulberries, all sorts of berries, fruits. So also a very, very special town in that way.
Indeed, I think we have that as the last part of the show, like what to do on non-flyable days. But while we are talking about retrieves and landings and top landings, I just wanted to touch upon very quickly, what are the usual lookout thing? Like, what are the hazards that you need to take care in once you're below the 500-meter AGL, as you said? Like, what should one be cautious about while coming into land?
So plan your landings earlier. Like I said, if you get below 1800 meters, start planning your landing. Only top land if you know what you're doing and it's not bang in the middle of the day, because in the middle of the day, there can be a lot of dusties. So if it's around 3, 4 in the evening and you know exactly where the wind is from, you can plan a landing, top land on table land. If you're landing in the valleys, I normally look out for the road, the main roads where the transport is, of course. And, as you get closer, definitely do look out for power lines. Avoid, avoid fields, which have standing crop. There's a lot of sugarcane crop in the area. You definitely don't want to land in a sugarcane field. It can be really horrible for you and the glider. Rice, I think earlier in the season, there is some fields, a few fields with rice, not too many. So yeah, just all the normal stuff you need to look out for, you know, cross country.
Makes sense. How's the local friendliness? Because as I understand, this is agricultural land, and everyone kind of makes a living out of these places, the farmers over there. Unlike big European or first world economies, they kind of literally survive over this. So, how is the local friendliness when you come in with your wing, and if you
Um,
happen to kind of.
I mean, I've never met a single aggressive local in the last, I mean, in the 10, 15 years, 10, 12 years I've been flying there. But yes, don't destroy somebody's crop. I think that's universal. So so even, I mean, look for fields which have already been cut. I think that's the best place to land. So do not land in a field that has standing crop. There's lots of other space, lots of landings everywhere. So I don't think, if it involves a slightly longer walk to the road, choose a field like that. Don't land very close to villages because there will be power lines, crisscrossing. It's India, so, most of the power is above ground. There are a lot of less dangerous cable TV lines, again, above ground. So look out for those. I mean, I tend to look for poles, I tend to look for the shadow of the poles because you don't really see the lines from the air. So yeah, locals are very friendly. I mean, most of the time they want to take you home, they want to feed you, they'll offer to drop you to the nearest roadhead. Any main road will have these little shuttles, not just buses, but there are these little kind of taxis like jeeps, which are packed with locals. And, it's cheap. They charge you like maybe 20 rupees. till the nearest town, which is why. And, I normally pay for two because my glider is kind of blocking space. So, so I just tell them I want a seat for my glider as well, and, pay for two, $40 is not too much. So yeah,
Makes sense. I think anything less than half a euro shouldn't count a payment in the retrieve options.
yeah, it's the important message for foreign pilots is don't spoil the system. Don't pay somebody too much. Try and find out beforehand. I know it sounds cheap, but keep it cheap.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Whereas quickly, if you can tell about the solo female pilot safety, and I mean, this is not just akin to India. Like this is, I asked this to every single guest in my podcast. How does life look like if you're a solo female pilot landing in? And
Well, we don't have a large number of solo female pilots, but in the past, we've had a lot of female pilots come in. Most of them have come with a group. So I'm not really sure. I mean, it's a gray area for me. I don't think it's dangerous. There are it's the entire region is quite safe and respectful of women. So I don't really see a difference between a female pilot and a male pilot. I don't think there's any special precaution that needs to be taken.
all right, so basically, keep your guard up and do the normal, usual, cautionary things, and life will be a bliss over there.
Yeah.
I think with that, Viz, we have pretty much given our audiences whatever they want to, whatever they should be having to navigate and touch the sky with glory in this gem of a place that Panchgani offers. Before we conclude on the show, we have this kind of tradition where you bring in a little bit of a story time. So if there's something or some flight or some incident that comes to your mind that gives you goosebumps and will be exciting for our audiences to hear, I'll be very thankful if you can share a part of it.
Well, I think one of the most beautiful moments I had. I mean, I did tell you about the very special flights from Panchgani to Kamshet. I look forward to these. They happen during a very small window when we get, 3,500 meters. But apart from that, last year, it was just one of those days. I didn't feel like going anywhere. And there were these lovely, fluffy clouds all around. And, I thermaled up to the cloud and it just seemed so safe that I continued thermaling through the cloud and exited from the top. And that was a really special moment. Of course, there was nobody else around, so I thought it was very safe to do that. But that kind of thinking about that still feel I get goosebumps. I think you saw a video of that as well. It was exhilarating. So I think
How does life look inside a cloud? If you can just explain a little. I've been always curious because a lot of people go in there and come out shit scared. But I remember the smile on your face was absolutely amazing. So how did it work when you were
well,
inside and still circling?
I have kind of you know got sucked into clouds when I don't want to. And in that case, it can be quite terrifying because, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know which way you're going. But in this case, I kind of mentally have decided that I will just keep thermaling till the top. So I did not, I mean, you're in a white room, you have no references, but I just kept focusing on my equipment and just centered, at the core and just kept thermaling. And before I knew it, I had popped out at the top. So I think I was inside for, maybe what seemed like an eternity, but I think it was 2.5 minutes, maybe.
That sounds super
Yeah.
exciting.
So, and I think I had traveled about, I think the cloud base was at 3,000 and I popped out at 4,000. So yeah, it was pretty amazing.
What a bliss. What a bliss. What are the airspace restrictions? I forgot to bring in this point. Like, how does airspace look in this area?
Okay, so so that's the tricky one. So airspace restriction, in that entire area is at around 2,000 meters. However, for the competition, we get a higher limit. So, having said that, there is only one flight that, goes overhead and we kind of know what time that is. And there's enough of a separation because flight level is 4,000. the lowest flight level for a commercial flight in the region. The closest airport is Pune, which is, I think, about close to 100 kilometers away, or maybe less. I'm not exactly sure on that. It's pretty easy. There are no, as you know, in India, there's no real, there are no real rules about flight. So we take our chances. So it's more established in a place like Kamshet where, there are a lot of schools operating and there's a much lower flight limit. But it's not really been a bother in this area. Anybody coming to Panchgani, try and get onto the Panchgani WhatsApp group. And, there's somebody who gives information if there's a helicopter coming in. There are helicopter landings in Panchgani. Whenever there's a celebrity or somebody coming in, it's not like a regular thing. So this information is shared with everyone. So I think that's the only real worry as far as the, airspace rules are concerned. For the competition, it's completely safe because, we take daily permission from Bombay ATC and Pune ATC. There's a very interesting thing that had happened in one of the competitions where we had been given a limit of 3,000 meters. So we had a very hard penalty on that. And just before the race, everybody took off. And I think all the competitors, went about 3,000 and it was impossible for them to stay down. So it was just one of the days where everything was lifting up and, so everybody had 0 points on that day, except this one pilot. It was a lady pilot who took off and bombed out. So she got minimum points and she actually won the task on the day. So it was quite insane. Yeah. So
Well, put your best foot forward and then everything falls in place. I think that's what happened with that pilot. No, but I think with that, we have come to a wrap on this episode, and sounds like a bliss to be. As we said in the beginning, that this place will definitely bring out the best in you and enhance your skills. Airspace seems to be another such point where in Europe you're like, oh my god, I have to keep on bopping up and down, and any of the skies in Indian subcontinent or in these countries are such a bliss to fly in because of these freedoms. But I think, Wes, for the remaining information, people can probably hop on to the page Civil Comps and contact you or the WhatsApp group, as you said. I think we can provide all of that in the show notes description, if you can send me the links later on.
Sure, I'll do that. And I want to add for everybody who's listening in that, we have a special early bird discount, which is getting over soon on the 9th of this month. So, register and pay up quickly to avail of this. It's a super discount. I think 17,000 Indian rupees, probably the cheapest comp in the world at the moment.
Definitely. I rarely come across European comps which cost less than 300 euros. So this place, good food, amazing flying conditions, and not a bang. Basically it's a bang on the buck and not burning a hole in your pocket. 6 weeks, 6 days of endless fun, I believe. That shouldn't hold back anyone. Sounds like a bliss. All right, Wiz, on that note, thank you so much for joining us. Do send us your links so our listeners can contact you. And from Paragliding Atlas, thank you and I wish you best of luck for this competition. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Andy, and chalo Panchgani.